and welcome back to Book Talk with Cara. Today, I am delighted to go in a slightly different direction for me because I have my friend Jill Williamson on here, and we're going to talk fantasy. And if you know me, I don't normally read a lot of fantasy, but I love Jill, and her books are fantastic. And I think you all will really enjoy it. And I know there are a lot of you who adore fantasy. So it's a lot of fun to have Jill on to talk about her new book, The Squire of the King. So, Jill, it is so much fun to have you here. Would you take just a moment to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Hello. Sorry. Hi, I'm Jill, and I write medieval fantasy. I've written lots of things, honestly, but my primary genre is medieval fantasy. And yes, I'm very excited. I've been working for the past 3 years on this series with Sunrise and my authors, which I can explain later. But Squire of Truth kicks off the new Blood of Kings Legend series. My first book I ever published back in 2009 was By Darkness Hid, which was book one in the Blood of Kings trilogy. And so now we're going back to that world and writing more books. And I'm really excited about it.
That is so awesome and fun. So, I've got to ask because the first part of this series, this world was kicked off in 2009. So, what was the most challenging about circling back to it? Because you've written a lot. So, what was it like to have to kind of dive back? Because I'm doing the same thing right now. I'm going back to a series that ironically came back, first came out in 2008-ish. And so, what for you has been most challenging about kind of going back to that time? And in your case, I mean, it was a world you created and a time and a whole like framework. So, what was most challenging for you about kind of going back to that one?
Remembering what actually happened in the books and what is just changed in my imagination over the years. Like I remember having conversations with my authors, no, that's not how it is. And then I go and I'd find it and I'm like, oh, I did write that. Or that I had written things that like there's a couple contrary things. Like you don't really think that your book is going to get mined into that level of, well, on this page you said he looked like he was in his late 20s, and here you say he looks like he's in his late 40s. I'm like, well, that's a different point of view character. But I mean, just things, these are side characters that we're writing now that I never thought would get to be, the lead. And so but I had to go back and read all three of the original books like several times, and then I also had to read my Bethany House series, which was an ancient prequel to the Blood of Kings, and I because I wanted to tie in some old things, and I had to read all that, and I'm taking hundreds of just tons of notes, and I'm there's no way my brain can remember it all. So it was hard to juggle all of that, and but it helped obviously to go back and read and be like, oh, that's what I said. What actually I love is having the Kindle versions on my phone, and I can search it real fast. I'll look up a person's name or something like, oh, that's what he said. But it's weird. I have like this canon I have to go back to and stick to it and make sure I'm not breaking anything.
Yeah, I would think that that's really challenging, especially when you're dealing with medieval and fantasy. So, why did you decide out of all the things that you could write that that was going to be your space?
Um, can't remember. I do remember that I got the idea for this story. I had two things happen back before 2009. I I had this weird dream about this, and it was a sci-fi dream, like kind of a Star Wars type of a movie, where this woman who was a female soldier, she was going into this hospital to get out the prince who'd been in an accident on the wrong side of town. So I remember there were two sides of town, like a bad side and a good side of town, or city. And there was this whole escape thing, and I thought, oh, that's so interesting. A character who, you know, this female warrior kind of person, and then I'd seen a tree that had in this yard of a house that had burned down, and half of it was dead, and that part that was hanging over the fence into the street was leafy green and blowing in the wind. And I thought, ooh, a world that's like half dark, right? That's so cool. And I drew a map of this world. Um, but as I was thinking, I think what really did it for me is, well, I love Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and the Narnia books, but also and I adore Star Wars too. So don't get me wrong. I think I was just afraid that I might mess it up because of the science fiction aspect, and I don't think I understood the genre of that Star Wars is not. It's more science fantasy if you want to get into the weeds on subgenres, but so I thought I had to get the science right, and I didn't feel like I really understood how to describe spaceships and the weaponry and technology, kind of that techno babble from like Star Trek. I didn't think I could get it right. I think I was feeling really intimidated, and I thought, well, you know what? If I make it fantasy, that's going to be a lot more simple. I can just say it is because it is, that it's half dark because, it is, and I can move from there. And I think that was the main reason I was afraid, which is sad, but that's okay.
But and
Good.
it makes sense to me because I think of the same thing like steampunk and stuff like that, where you're taking some reality of like this science and then you're taking it to another level. And I'm like, that sounds like a lot of research and that sounds like a lot of
Yes.
work. And I think of the amount of research I have to do when I'm doing World War II, or even when I'm doing, like my legal romantic suspense, and I'm a lawyer and I know a lot already, and I still have to do a ton of research. So the whole idea of doing like sci-fi, I'm like, no, no, thank you. That just, yes, that sounds intimidating and just like a lot. So I totally get that. But when you're thinking like medieval, to me, that sounds like a lot of research. And I'm reading one of Lisa
I
Thunbergren's,
was naive.
yeah, like I'm reading that right now. And I've been to Italy and I've spent a lot of time in Italy with study abroad and stuff like that. And so I know these places she's writing about. And I'm like, there's still a lot of research that goes into that because people like me are like, yeah, I've been there. You got that wrong. Or she doesn't. But there would be people like me who would think we know a lot when we really don't. And so, how do you balance all that? Like, yours is a completely fictional world. Like, there is, as far as I can tell, there is no spot on the map. So, is that one way that you dealt with it? You're like, no, I'm just creating my own world completely. So, it's kind of like the world like Shireton, where there is no Shire. It's you just made your own. So, no one can tell you you got it wrong.
Absolutely. That's what's beautiful about fantasy. Well, not that's the only thing, but that's one of the things. Like if I was writing historical fantasy or historical fiction or alternate history, or there's a lot of subgenres there, I would have to get it right. And I know me, I would be meticulous about trying to get it right. And it is a ton of work, and I didn't want to do that. However, even picking medieval fantasy, when it is my own world, I still had to do research. And then still, after the book sold, and I started working with my editor, he would ask questions like, so this scene where the old knight teaches the boy how to fight with a sword, where did you get this information? And I'm like, I made it up. And he goes, yeah, I don't think this is how sword fighting works. And I was like, oh. So I had to go read a book on sword fighting. And the same thing happened with this army moving through the woods. He's like, Jill, this is not how an army moves through the woods. You need to go research, a medieval army and how they work and what parts of the army. And I'm like, oh. And I did a ton of research about herbs and things because my girl was a healer, and so she was always picking these plants and stuff, and I wanted to make sure that they were the right things, and so that was more. So there was still a ton of research that I had to do. But then, like I said, talking with my authors, did we have spoons or do we not have spoons? Are we eating on trenchers or do we have plates? And we debate it. So I'm like, well, in that city they had them, in this city they didn't, and those were inconsistencies on my part. But at the same time, you have a big world, and so maybe this city's a little more advanced than that city, or wealthier perhaps, and so they're not using trenchers. Trenchers, if you don't know, are like pieces of toast that they use as plates. So yeah, it's still tricky, but with fantasy, you don't have to get it all perfect. And you can make stuff up, and you get away with it where you can't in historical type
I love
stories.
that. Yeah, and it's so much fun because people are like, it's just fiction. You just make it up. You don't have to do all this research. And we're like, no, 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 no. There is so much that goes into writing fiction, so much research. Now, you've been talking about your authors, and this is something that's so unique about Sunrise Publishing and kind of the model that this particular house uses. So, you have this series that you have written in the past. In this case, back it started coming out in 2009, and it has this huge fan base where people are like, we want more. And so you and Susie May Warren and her team got together and were like, let's create more stories. And The Squire of Truth is the first one that is coming out in this more. And I've been reading it. It's really fun. I feel like I've been plopped into this world where there's this whole conflict, and it's very medieval. It's very fun. Lots of conflict, lots of things going on. And of course, there's romance and all the fun things. But you've got authors. So it's not just you writing, which means there's actually a lot more work that goes into it. So tell me more about first Squire of Truth and then why you decided to do it with Sunrise.
Okay, think I have to answer those backwards because I got connected with Sunrise. Susie had been wanting to do a fantasy line, and she thought, oh, Jill, which I was tickled to get her email because we used to stand in the back of the line together at writers conferences. We'd both be on staff, and not every conference would do it this way, but sometimes they would announce staff alphabetically at like the opening lunch. And Warren and Williamson, we were in line together, and so I've known her for years. But I didn't know that she read those books and bought them for her kids back in the day. And she knew about my work with Go Teen Writers, the blog that I did with Stephanie Morrill, and eventually Shannon did more. So she knew I had a teacher's heart for writing as well, and that's what she was kind of looking for with a Sunrise mentor person. So that's an author who has a big world and who has a heart for teaching. And so she asked me if I would be interested, and I was like, yes, that's amazing. And so the idea is that then we would do a contest. Authors who are unpublished would be able to apply to write stories in this world. Like I listed some of my side characters that they could look at. They were supposed to read the books and get an idea if they hadn't read them. And then we narrowed it down. They were blind auditions, so we narrowed it down to 10, and then we narrowed it down to the top 3. And they won, and they got to, they're going to be writing books in my world, and I've mentored them as they did that, wrote their first draft, and now they're almost ready to come out. My assignment from Susie was to write a novella that would get readers back into the world and kind of set up my author's books and what we were doing. And she mentioned it would be great, Jill, if your characters could be like cameos in your author's books. And I was like, okay. So I think I haven't read every Sunrise book. They have, I think I'm series 10, so they have 9 different lines besides mine. But a lot of them are like a small town kind of like in this small town we have firefighters or whatever. But mine is like a massive world, and so I was like, how would my characters go to these other places where my authors are writing these stories? And so I had this idea of traveling minstrels that would go right and travel around, and so that's where I started. And it just was it was a rabbit trail of events that got me like onto this character Cole from my original series, and that he would actually really have a heart for music, but he's just was too poor, and the king gave him a lute, so now he wants to find people to play with, and he meets this girl who's a singer. And I set it up, but I also had to prove that Cole was capable of given this like mission of an assignment. I don't want to spoil my book, but and so that's where the idea of the murder mystery came from. So I wrote a romantasy murder mystery is what I wrote. It was supposed to be a novella, but it's me, and I write epic fantasy, and it ended up being 60,000 words, which is not a novella. So I ended up writing a short novel. It is not like the rest. The rest of the books will stand alone with that romance that has its happily ever after. Mine kind of has a bit of a cliffhanger that sets up what's to come. And so I will give another book. I'm writing it right now for my characters Cole and Mistal from Squire of Truth. But I hope that answers the question, how we got my authors and a little bit about the story.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I love it because one of the things that's been kind of missing in the space is a place for unpublished authors to get started. And so Sunrise has been filling that in such a neat way where there's this mentoring, and you have absolutely been in that space with the Go Teen Writer and all the work you've been doing to help people get started. So this is such a natural next step for you. I love it. So are you excited about the authors you're working with on your series?
Oh, absolutely. I love them. I want to say it was 2021, or I think it might have been February of 2022 that we went to Florida, and we all went together and we brainstormed their 3 books together over, 3 days. With Susie. It was really fun. And we got to know each other, and we got to know their stories, and then I've been working with them. And so they're lovely humans. I adore them. I'm so grateful. Sometimes I just feel really humbled that these people would want to spend their life writing stories in my world. I know they all have stories of their own that they've been writing for years, and so it's been really special. And I love their stories so much, and they're writing more, and which is exciting. So there will be more to come. They're all in their second books now, which is also really fun. So yeah, I love them. Let's see. I'll just say really quick, Andrew Swearingen is coming first. Lord of Winter comes out in April. He's writing a character named Eric Livna, if anybody's listening who knows my books. Eric had to leave and follow the king south to fight in the war, and now he's coming home after like 4 or 5 months, and he's found that someone is trying to take over his town while he was away. So he's got the He's got trouble. And then the second book coming out is in July. Kelly Fernlake is writing a fan favorite, Lady Tara. And I don't want to spoil too much for her story, but in the original trilogy, she ended up getting married off to this really, really old guy, which is something that happens in the medieval world, but is shocking to readers of today. Like, why would her dad do that? Well, he needed some food and all this kind of thing. But she's gonna be set free from that and be on an adventure. And then in September, Nikki Florica is writing about Sir Rigel, the most eligible bachelor in the world of Eretz. That's the name of my land. And so everybody wants to know why he has not yet picked a wife. So we're going to find out his history. Anyway, so that's just a glimpse of them. And it's been delightful.
Oh, I love that. And it's so fun when there's this gelling, and the retreats that y'all do with Susie seems to just really kick them off well and get this fun cohesion going with the authors and the series, and it's so much fun. So, what's one thing as you look back on all your writing and your journey, and you and your husband are now thinking about producing movies and things like that? What's one thing you would go back and tell your younger writing self, if, based on what you know now about your journey?
Um, I don't know. What would I tell myself? I think I would tell myself to be more patient and to not worry as much. I know a lot of authors, and I've talked to a lot of authors who've been at it longer than me, and many of them would say, every book is the book that was going to ruin my career. I just knew that this was the one that was going to be terrible. And that made me feel a little better, like, okay, I'm not crazy, but we do tend to worry, like, oh, is this one going to be acceptable to the publisher or the readers? And some people don't worry, but those of us who are warriors. And so I would tell myself, none of that matters. That's not what you're writing the best stories you can for the readers that you love, and let it go. Trust God with it. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Not that any of that worrying can change anything. So, don't. Easier said than done. I know my younger self would be very confused. Like, what do you mean? Like, how am I supposed to do that? But just hands open. You don't get to control it. Trust the Lord with your life and your career. It's gonna be okay.
I love that, and it's so hard to do, but when we can, it's so freeing. And
Yeah.
our creative selves need that. We need that ability to let go and just be free with it. When did you first know you were going to be a writer?
I first knew when I determined that I was going to write a book, which wasn't until after I had left the fashion industry. I had my first child. I was staying home, and I don't do, I don't, I need things to do. I'm a doer. I'm a worker bee. And I was home, and I was like, what am I going to do with my spare time? And I didn't have a lot of spare time as a mom of an infant, but um, kind of wanted to know what was I going to be when I grow up, now that I had decided that fashion industry wasn't for me. And I actually was on a kick that I was going to be a speaker for youth events, because my husband was in youth ministry, and so I thought my story was important. I grew up in Alaska without running water and electricity, and I thought that this was interesting, and so I started trying to write articles, thinking, oh, I stumbled onto something that said sometimes speakers are hired when their articles are read in a magazine, and I thought, oh, make an article for a magazine. How hard could that be? It's very hard. But I started writing nonfiction, and then my youth group kids were reading books, and since I'm a book nerd, I was always like, what are you reading? And I was reading them too. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with the things they were reading per se, but none of them were from a Christian worldview. And so I got on this kick, like, I should write them a book. It would be great. Every Christian would love it, which again was so naive, because every Christian doesn't agree on anything. No people just don't agree on everything. But that's what I started out thinking. I'm going to write this, and so I wrote this missionary spy thing, where these kids were getting recruited and trained to go out into different countries, and and that's what started it. And when I started writing fiction, it was so fun and so addictive. I instantly felt really guilty that I had abandoned my speaking articles that were not that nonfiction. And I thought, oh dear, until I spoke to my pastor and kind of confessed my stress and worry about this. And he said, Jill, Jesus told stories. And what about Nathan from the Bible? He convicted King David of his sin with a story. Stories are powerful. If that's what God's calling you to do, then write stories. I was just like, woohoo, sweet. So I felt like that was it. And I had been given permission, and off I went, and I haven't looked back, because, well, you probably know, once you start writing, it's hard to stop writing. it's part of who you are.
It's so true. Yeah, I love that he actually gave you that freedom and that what he said was like that release that no, this is okay. Keep going if that's what feels creative and freeing to you. That's awesome. What's your biggest challenge as an author? Because there's so many different things. You know, like for some people it's finding time, for others it's the actually doing it and not being distracted. But for you, what's that thing that is really the most challenging?
Um, there's a couple things. Like I struggle with too many ideas of trying to decide which one I should work on next. Thankfully, I've really had to talk to myself. I said, if you're going to do the sunrise thing, Jill, then that's pretty much all you're doing. It's going to be a lot. It's going to take on a lot, and you're sunrise. You're wearing sunrise hat for I don't know how long, and that's helped a little bit. But I still like, oh, what about this idea? So that can be difficult because there's only so many hours in a day, and I can't write all the things. As far as like as a writer itself, I don't like first drafts as much as I like editing. Um, Getting that first draft on the page is always my challenge. And once it's there, I'm like, okay, now I have something to fix and make good. So I learned a long time ago to give myself permission to stink so I could try to get to the end of this messy first draft and then be like, okay, now I really kind of feel like I understand the story. I can fix it. So that's really hard for me. It's like, oh, please let the book, I want to get to the end of the first draft. So that's hard.
I love it. I wish I had your problem with too many ideas because right now I'm at the I need to come up with my proposal for the next thing. And I'm like, where's the idea? I have like this very vague idea. And I always love it when it's okay. Now it's time to write. Yay, yay. So I wish I had that problem. Um, okay, last question before we get to like a tiny mini speed round. What brings you joy during writing?
Mm. I get really excited when it's working, when the story's working, when I really know who the characters are and I as I'm writing their words and their thoughts and their behaviors, I it's fun. It's fun because I know who they are. It's really hard when you're writing a story and you haven't really figured them out yet and you're kind of feeling like I don't know what they would do. And so it's almost kind of this magic of storytelling thing that you kind of don't really understand until you've experienced it, but that is my favorite part of the writing process. It's actually really fun sometimes to go back and read some of my old stuff. I know some people say they don't like that, but especially if it's been a while, I my Spy Kid story, which I eventually did get published, he's so sarcastic, and I had a ball coming up with the ridiculous things he would say. He was kind of snotty too, but it was so fun because he was very realistic, and he just makes me giggle. So sometimes going back and reading sometimes is also really fun.
I love it too. And I agree with you. It's like a lot of people won't go back and reread their writing, but there have been times like as I've got my rights back and I've republished my books and I've been like, oh, I'm going to have to really rework these. And then I've read them and I'm like, no, I'm actually still really proud of these books. And there's something joyful in that just to be like, wow, God, this was a really cool partnership. And maybe I'll tweak things, but there's still a lot of, no, this is still good. And so I don't know. It makes me
Yes.
sad when people won't go back and look at them because I'm like, you might surprise yourself. You might actually be delighted by what's on the page. All
I made
right.
myself cry when I read
Oh,
the book because I had forgotten. This is sad, but I had forgotten a story thread. I didn't even remember it was in there, and I was like moved by it. And yeah, it was both. It was kind of shocking, but also kind of joyful. Like, wow,
that's
I
awesome.
forgot my own story.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so a couple of really fast questions that I ask everybody. Um, Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Ooh, what kind of tea?
Uh, I'm more of a hot chocolate girl, honestly, but
Okay.
tea. I have right here. I have orange lemon.
Ooh, that sounds good. And what kind of hot chocolate? Are you just a straight hot chocolate or you do one of those fancy like mint hot chocolate?
I do like the mint peppermint hot chocolate is one of my favorites, but I
Yeah.
don't have it a lot, but yeah, at Christmas, I'm like, ooh, it's gonna be out.
Yeah. It's Christmas. Let's add the peppermint. And then sweet or salty?
Um, I like both. I have to alternate though. I guess I go with sweet first.
Okay. And do you write in the morning or in the evening?
Morning.
Oh, you're one of those. Are you one of those who gets up like at 4 in the morning to write?
No, I
Okay.
can't.
Yeah, there are
I
some,
just my brain works best in the morning.
yeah.
If it
I've
gets
got
too tired.
Some of my writing friends are like, I get up at 4 in the morning and I write till 7. And I'm like, you are crazy.
I
I
have to
wish
go
I
to
could do
bed at
that.
like 8.
Yeah, exactly. I can't do that.
Well,
All right, Jill, where can people find you and your books on the internet? How can they connect with you?
they can go to jillwilliamson.com, and that's my website, and it hooks to my author store. I'm on all the social medias, Jill Williamson, sometimes Jill Williamson author. Spire of Truth is available in all the online places, and you can also get it through Sunrise Publishing store. If you order print books from me, I will autograph them. Other than that, they're going to be everywhere. There's an audiobook that's fantastic too, with two dual narrators. They're darling. That was and that's on Audible and Apple and all the places audiobooks are. Sunrise also sells the audiobook.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was so much fun.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was so fun.